Agarwood ships First Incense P2 after a while. Weilong chuckled and said, 3 minutes of silence. It seems like a tribute. Qiaoqi said, we are sitting together. Do we have to talk? As he said that, he stretched out his arms, resting on the chair behind Weilong. Weilong said hurriedly, we'd better talk. Qiaoqi said, you must speak. I will speak Portuguese to you. Then he started speaking in a low voice. Weilong tilted his head and hugged his knees. Listened for a long time. Then smiled and said, I don't know what you are talking about. Most likely you are scolding me. Qiaoqi said softly, do you think my tone is scolding you? Weilong suddenly blushed. He frowned and lowered his head. Qiaoqi said, I want to translate it into English and tell it to you, but I'm afraid I don't have the courage. Weilong covered his ears and said, who wants to listen? He stood up and walked towards the crowd. It was already dark by then and the moon had just come up. It's yellow, like jade-colored satin. A bit of incense ash fell off during the embroidery, and a small piece was burned. Weilong turned around and saw Qiaoqi following behind, and said, I don't have time to bother with you now. Please don't bother my aunt anymore. Thank you, Qiaoqi said. You don't know. I just like to watch. Your aunt is panicking. She rarely gets panicked. A woman who is too calm and balanced is not cute. Weilong spat, and repeatedly told him not to irritate his aunt. Qiaoqi smiled softly and said, it is rare for your aunt to fail, but for me, she failed. Today when she was feeling complacent, she happened to see me, reminding her of her last failure everywhere. No wonder she was angry. Weilong said, if you keep talking nonsense, I will be angry. Qiaoqi said, if you want me to go away, I will leave. You have to promise me that we will go to dinner together tomorrow. Weilong said, I can't. You know I can't. Qiaoqi said, if I want to see you, do I have to come here? Your aunt doesn't allow me to come to the door. Today is because there are many people here, and she can't save face. Otherwise, I was kicked out a long time ago. Weilong lowered his head and said nothing. Just as he was talking, Mrs. Liang and Lu Jialan happened to be holding a glass of cocktail in their hands and walk over side by side. Both of them were 70 or 80% drunk. When Mrs. Liang saw Weilong, she said, go find Gigi and play the piano for us. While everyone is still here, we can sing a few songs to make it lively. Weilong agreed and looked at Qiao again. She had already disappeared without a trace. Weilong couldn't find Zhou Gigi everywhere, so he asked his aunts and they said they were washing their faces upstairs. Weilong went upstairs and saw the lights in her aunt's bathroom. Zhou Gigi was standing in front of the mirror, using a small square of tissue paper, dipped in cleansing ointment to wipe away the oil on her face. Weilong said, they asked you to come down and play the piano. Gigi said, I don't know who is going to show off her golden voice. I don't have the patience to accompany me. Weilong said with a smile, no one sings solo. Everyone sang a few pop songs to join in the fun. Gigi twisted the tissue paper into a ball, threw it at the mirror, and said, the excitement is quite lively. Those people all have bad voices, and everyone sounds like a 7-year-old girl when they speak. It was like 8 people singing in a chorus. Weilong chuckled, leaned against the door frame and said, you're drunk. Gigi said, really? You drank it for them. She drank a few glasses of wine, and her face was even more. It's white, but the eye circles are a little red. Weilong said, you seem to be familiar with these people today. Gigi said, I know a lot of students from South China University. They hold tea dances, dinner dances, or picnics during festivals. She always likes to get involved with us sisters. Last year, my sister entered South China University, so of course she has to be a part of her. Weilong asked, after graduation next year, do you plan to go to South China? Gigi said, according to my opinion, I can't wait to fly far away and go to Australia or Honolulu to go to university. I'm tired of staying in Hong Kong, Weilong said as Qiao also studying at South China University. Gigi said, he can be regarded as an outstanding underachiever in the Qiao family. 5 years ago, he was admitted to the University of China, and he stopped studying after half a year. Yes. Last year, because of my sister Ji Mao, He entered the University of Washington again and made a lot of trouble. Fortunately, his father dislikes him among the brothers, otherwise he would have been angry to death. Weilong, you don't know bad boys. No matter how good they are, they still have a gloomy temper, a bit of a girlish temper. Weilong swallowed one of his words and smiled at Gigi. Gigi quickly said, "Yes, I am a mongrel myself, and I have suffered this hardship. You see, our possible targets are all mongrel boys. Chinese people cannot do that because we have received foreign-style education. Cannot interfere with pure Chinese people, neither can foreigners. Which white person here does not have extremely deep racial concepts? This makes him personally agree, but their society does not agree. Who marries an Oriental? This life's career is over. Who is such a romantic fool these days?" Weilong didn't expect that she would actually have a deep conversation with him, and nodded immediately. He chewed his fingernails and smiled. "Really, I never thought of this level. It turns out that the range of your choices is so narrow," Gigi said. "Just for this reason, Ji Mao also wholeheartedly hopes to leave Hong Kong. The colonial atmosphere here is too strong. In another place, wouldn't the racial boundaries be so strict? Isn't it possible that there won't be a place for us to settle down in the whole world place?" As he said that, the blush on his eye circles deepened. Weilong said with a smile, "You are so drunk. You are so sad." After a pause, he said with a smile, "What happened next?" Gigi didn't understand and asked, "What happened next?" Weilong said, "What happened next? Kiao and your sister." Gigi said, "Oh, you are talking about them. There were many ridiculous things later. It made my sister very angry. You don't know how bad Kiao's mouth is. Outside what rumors have been created." Before he could finish his sentence, Nair knocked on the door and came in, saying that he was urging someone to come. Gigi had no choice but to finish cleaning up hastily, and went downstairs with Weilong, walking and talking along the way. As soon as the two appeared in the living room, everyone clapped their hands and forced Weilong to sing. Weilong couldn't refuse and sang Myanmar Moon. After singing, she carefully peeked at Mrs. Liang's expression and knew that Mrs. Liang was not very sure about Lu Jialin. Be careful, lest she become suspicious, and stubbornly refused to sing anymore. This garden party was originally for afternoon tea, but it ended at 7 or 8 o'clock. Mrs. Liang and Weilong only attended to the guests, but did not eat anything themselves, so they ate as usual. Mrs. Liang felt a little guilty because of Lu Jialin's incident, so she became even more close and considerate to Weilong. The two of them couldn't think of anything to say. Mrs. Liang only said, "Today's chocolate cake was not done well. Please remember it in the future and ask the Kiao family to lend their chief clerk to help out for the day." Weilong agreed. Mrs. Liang cut the cold cow's tongue with a knife in her hand and just smiled at the cow's tongue. After a while, she picked up the water glass to drink water and smiled blankly at the glass again. When he reached for the pepper shaker, some memories seemed to be triggered again, and the smile on his lips became deeper. Weilong sighed secretly and thought, women are really pitiful. She is so happy when a man gives her some good looks. Mrs. Liang raised her head and saw Weilong, and suddenly asked with a smile, What are you laughing at?" Weilong was stunned and replied, "When will I laugh?" There was a large silver shield displayed on the pine wood cupboard behind Mrs. Liang, which Mrs. Liang received from donating the basic fund of the Hong Kong branch of the Royal Society of Medicine. Metals can be judged by their light. When Weilong looked at his face reflected in the silver shield, he didn't smile slightly, and he quickly straightened his expression. Mrs. Liang said, "What are you talking about? After all, in a kid's house, he is so happy when he treats guests." After saying that, she went to eat her cow tongue with a smile. Weilong was careless, and the corners of his mouth moved up again, and he laughed, frowning, and said to himself, "What's wrong with you? You have a reason to be angry. Why are you not angry at all? People in ancient times dared to be angry, but you don't dare to say anything. Don't you even dare to be angry?" But her heart was on Mrs. Liang and Lu Jialin, like a dragonfly touching the water, lightly passing by, and then flying to nowhere. The aunt and nephew each invited a guest to accompany them during the meal. so it was actually for people per table, so they didn't feel lonely eating. After dinner, Weilong returned to the bedroom, where Nair was making the bed, folding a set of moon-white pajamas and spreading them on the pillow. As soon as he saw Weilong, he smiled and said, "Well, Kiao, I'm very careful about you." Weilong sneered, "It's really weird. I don't know what kind of extraordinary person this surnamed Kiao is. No one can look down on him. You said to more words to me." Kur said, "This person, although he is not a great person, he is not easy to mess with." Weilong shrugged his shoulders. "Who messed with him?" Kur said, "If you don't mess with him, it's the same if he messes with you. Isn't it the same?" Weilong walked towards the bathroom and said, Okay, you don't need to say it. Just now Zhou Jiji has already done 1, 5, 10. I have reported his bad deeds once, and you must have heard clearly outside the door." With that said, he was about to close the bathroom door. Kur came in with his heels crossed and said, "Girl, you don't know. It doesn't matter if he is misbehaving outside, but the worst thing is, his father doesn't like him. His mother fell out of favor not long after she got married, so she doesn't have much money at hand. He didn't save any money. He himself refused to learn well, and Sir Kiao Cheng never liked to interfere with his affairs. Now that I am still alive, he is already very poor, always fights famine. In the future, when I die, I will leave behind 20. The concubine here has more than a dozen sons, and even the celebrity in front of me can't get much of the property. So who else will get his turn? He has no skills except playing, and he will have to suffer a lot in the future." Weilong silently, he stared at Xiangkur for a long time, then smiled and said, "Don't worry, although I am stupid, I am not that stupid." Now that she has said this, she will pay attention every step of the way. Kiao did not break into Liang's house again, but whenever she went out to socialize, no matter what the gathering was, he was always there. Weilong was much colder towards him than when they first met. She has always been very busy socializing outside. Mrs. Liang was willing to let her out because she thought she was an eyesore at home. Mrs. Liang was having a heated fight with Lu Jialin. She knew that Weilong and Lu Jialin had some special feelings. She guessed that Weilong had some grudges in her heart, so she hoped that she would leave her eyes temporarily so as not to distract Lu Jialin. Unexpectedly, all good things come to pass. Mrs. Liang's old love, Sichu Zi, suddenly returns to Hong Kong. Although Sichu Zi was not young, his temperament was even more irritable than that of a young man, and he was also carefree. Mrs. Liang did not want to offend her longtime friend just for the sake of temporary pleasure, so she pushed Lu Jialin aside and concentrated on dealing with Sichu Zi. The two of them walked together. Kiao Chi sighed softly and said, "I really deserve a beating. Why didn't I know there was a person like you in Hong Kong?" Weilong said, "After I came to live with my aunt, I haven't been here before. I don't go out often. Otherwise, there must be no reason why I don't know you. You are very active outside." "I know," Kiao said. "I almost missed this opportunity." "Really, yes. You can't imagine what a coincidence this is. Maybe we were born into centuries. Maybe we were born in the same century, but you were born 20 years before me. 10 years is bad enough. If I were born before, if you were born 20 years earlier, it probably won't matter. I think I won't be too annoying when I get old. What do you think?" Weilong smiled and said, "It's impossible to talk about it." She glanced at him again, trying to imagine what he would be like when he was older. He was even bloodless than Zhou Jiji. Even his lips were as pale as a plaster statue. Under the dark eyebrows and eyelashes, the eyes were like windswept rice fields, sometimes revealing the green light of the water under the rice, flashing, and then darkening again. He is tall and well-proportioned, but his clothes are so snug and casual that people forget the existence of his body. Compared with him, Lu Jialin looked much stupider. Weilong hated Mrs. Liang because of Lu Jialin. Kiao was the only person she knew who could resist Mrs. Liang's magic. When she thought about it, she couldn't help but feel more favorable to Kiao. Kiao Chi asked if she was from Shanghai, and asked, "Do you like Shanghai or Hong Kong?" Weilong said, "The scenery is naturally better in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is famous for its coast. If I could swim, I would probably prefer Hong Kong, Qiaoqi said. I will teach you slowly if you are willing. Then said, you speak English really well. Weilong said, where are you talking? A year ago, I was in school. She never speaks English outside of the classroom. She just casually said a few words with her aunt's friends recently. Her grammar is completely wrong, Qiaoqi said. You're not used to speaking, so you're a little tired, aren't you? Let's not speak English anymore. Weilong, then what are you talking about? You don't understand Shanghai's, and my Cantonese is not good either, Qiaoqi said. Don't say anything. You have been socializing with those boring people for a long time. It's time to take a break. Weilong smiled and said, after what you said, I really feel a little tired. He picked a bench and sat down, and Qiaoqi also sat down. After a while, Weilong chuckled and said, 3 minutes of silence. It seems like a condolence. Qiaoqi asked, we are sitting together. Do we have to talk? As she said this, she stretched out her arm and put it on the chair behind Weilong. Weilong said hurriedly, we'd better talk. Qiaoqi said, you must speak. I will speak Portuguese to you. Then he started speaking in a low voice. Weilong tilted his head and hugged his knees, listened for a long time, then smiled and said, I don't know what you are talking about. Most likely you are scolding me, Qiaoqi said softly. Do you think my tone is scolding you? Weilong suddenly blushed. He frowned and lowered his head. Qiaoqi said, I want to translate it into English and tell it to you, but I'm afraid I don't have the courage. Weilong covered his ears and said, who wants to listen? He stood up and walked towards the crowd. It was already dark by then, and the moon had just come up. It's yellow, like jade-colored satin. A bit of incense ash fell off during the embroidery, and a small piece was burned. Weilong turned around and saw Qiaoqi following behind, and said, I don't have time to bother with you now. Please don't bother my aunt anymore. Thank you. Qiaoqi said, you don't know. I just like to watch. Your aunt is panicking. She rarely gets panicked. A woman who is too calm and balanced is not cute. Weilong spat, and repeatedly told him not to irritate his aunt. Qiaoqi smiled softly and said, it is rare for your aunt to fail, but for me, she failed. Today, when she was feeling complacent, she happened to see me, reminding her of her last failure everywhere. No wonder she was angry. Weilong said, if you keep talking nonsense, I will be angry. Qiaoqi said, if you want me to go away, I will leave. You have to promise me that we will go to dinner together tomorrow. Weilong said, I can't. You know I can't. Qiaoqi said, if I want to see you, do I have to come here? Your aunt won't let me come to the door. Today is because there are so many people here and she can't afford to lose face. Otherwise, I would have kicked her out. Weilong lowered his head and said nothing. Just as he was talking, Mrs. Liang and Lu Jialin happened to be holding a glass of cocktail in their hands, and they were walking side by side. They were both 70 to 80% drunk. Mrs. Liang saw Weilong, then said, go and find Gigi and play the piano for us. While everyone was still here, we sang a few songs, and it was lively. Weilong agreed, and then looked at Qiao, who had already disappeared without a trace. Weilong couldn't find Gigi everywhere, so he asked his aunts, and they said they were washing their faces upstairs. Weilong went upstairs and saw his aunt's bathroom. The lamp was lit in the room, and Gigi stood in front of the mirror, using a small square of tissue paper dipped in cleansing ointment to wipe off the oil on her face. Weilong said, they asked you to go down and play the piano. Gigi said, I don't know who is going to show off his golden voice. I don't have that much patience to play accompaniment. Weilong said with a smile, no one sings solo. Everyone sings a few pop songs to join in the fun. Gigi twisted the tissue paper into a ball, threw it at the mirror, and said, the excitement is quite lively. That group of people all had poor voices, and when each one opened his mouth, it was like a chorus of 7 or 8 people. Weilong chuckled, leaned against the door frame and said, you're drunk. Gigi said, isn't it? Feed them. She drank a few glasses of wine, and her face was even whiter, but her eye circles were a little red. Weilong said, you seem to be familiar with these people today. Gigi said, I know a lot of students from South China University. They hold tea dances, dinner dances, or picnics during festivals, and they always like to get involved with our sisters. Last year, my sister entered South China University. Naturally, we cannot be left out, Weilong said. After graduation next year, do you plan to go to South China? Gigi said, according to my wishes, I wish I could fly far away, to Australia or Honolulu to attend university. I am tired of staying in Hong Kong. Weilong said, is Kiao Kikiao also studying at South China University? Gigi said, he can be regarded as an outstanding person in the Kiao family. He was admitted to the University of Washington 5 years ago and stopped after half a year. Last year, because of my sister Ji Mao, he entered the University of Washington again and caused a lot of trouble. It's a good thing that his father dislikes him the most among his brothers, otherwise he would have been pissed to death. Weilong, you don't know, bastard boys, no matter how good they are, have a gloomy temper and a bit of a girlish temper. Weilong swallowed something he said and smiled at Gigi. Gigi said quickly, yes, I am a mongrel myself, and I have suffered from this. You see, our potential partners are all mongrel boys. Chinese people cannot do that, because the foreign-style education we received cannot interfere with pure Chinese people. Not even foreigners, which white people here don't have extremely deep racial concepts. This makes him personally agree, but their society does not agree. Whoever marries an Oriental will have his career in ruins. Who is such a romantic fool these days? Weilong didn't expect that she would actually have a deep conversation with him, so he nodded immediately. He gnawed on his fingernails and said with a smile, really, I never thought about this level. It turns out that the range of your choices is so narrow, Gigi said. Just for this reason, Ji Mao also wholeheartedly hopes to leave Hong Kong. The colonial atmosphere here is too strong. In another place, wouldn't the racial boundaries be so strict? It doesn't necessarily mean that there is no place for us to settle down in the whole world. As he spoke, the blush on his eye circles deepened. Weilong smiled and said, you are so drunk, you are so sad. After a pause, he said with a smile, what happened next? Gigi didn't understand and asked. Later, Weilong said, Kiao Kikiao and your sister. Gigi said, oh, you are talking about them. There were many funny things later. My sister is so angry. You don't know how bad Kiao's mouth is and how many rumors she has created outside. Before he could finish his sentence, Tor knocked on the door and came in, saying that he was urging people to invite him. Gigi could only hastily after cleaning up. Weilong went downstairs, talking all the way. As soon as the two appeared in the living room, everyone clapped their hands and forced Weilong to sing. Weilong couldn't refuse and sang The Moon of Burma. After singing, she carefully peeked at Mrs. Liang's expression, knowing that Mrs. Liang was not very sure about Lu Jialin. If she was too prominent and attracted too much attention, she was afraid that she would become suspicious. So she was stubborn and refused to sing anymore. Sung. This garden party was originally for afternoon tea, but it ended at 7 or 8 o'clock. Mrs. Liang and Weilong only attended to the guests, but did not eat anything themselves, so they ate as usual. Mrs. Liang felt a little guilty because of Lu Jialin's incident, so she became even more close and considerate to Weilong. The two of them couldn't think of anything to say. Mrs. Liang only said, today's chocolate cake was not done well. Please remember it in the future and ask the Kiao family to lend their chief clerk to help out for the day. Weilong agreed. Mrs. Liang cut the cold cow's tongue with a knife in her hand and just smiled at the cow's tongue. After a while, she picked up the water glass to drink water and smiled blankly at the glass again. When he reached for the pepper shaker, some memories seemed to be triggered again, and the smile on his lips became deeper. Weilong sighed secretly and thought, women are really pitiful. She is so happy when a man gives her some good looks. Mrs. Liang raised her head and saw Weilong, and suddenly asked with a smile, what are you laughing at? Weilong was stunned and replied, when will I laugh? There was a large silver shield displayed on the pine wood cupboard behind Mrs. Liang, which Mrs. Liang received from donating the basic fund to the Hong Kong branch of the Royal Society of Medicine. Metals can be judged by their light. When Weilong looked at his face reflected in the silver shield, he didn't smile slightly, and he quickly straightened his expression. Mrs. Liang said, "What are you talking about? After all, in a kid's house, he is so happy when he treats guests." After saying that, she went to eat her cow tongue with a smile. Weilong was careless, and the corners of his mouth moved up again, and he laughed, frowning, and said to himself, "What's wrong with you? You have a reason to be angry. Why are you not angry at all? People in ancient times dared to be angry. Don't you dare to speak out? Don't you even dare to be angry anymore?" But her heart was like a dragonfly touching water, flitting lightly over Mrs. Liang and Lu Jialan, and then flew to nowhere. The aunt and nephew each invited a guest to accompany them during the meal, so it was actually for people per table, so they didn't feel lonely eating. After dinner, Weilong returned to the bedroom, where Nair was making the bed, folding a set of moon-white pajamas and spreading them on the pillow. As soon as he saw Weilong, he smiled and said, "Well, Kiao, I'm very careful about you." Weilong sneered, "It's really weird. I don't know what kind of extraordinary person this surnamed Kiao is. No one can look down on him. You said to more words to me." Kur said, "This person, although he is not a great person, he is not easy to mess with." Weilong shrugged his shoulders. "Who messed with him?" Kur said, "If you don't mess with him, it's the same if he messes with you. Isn't it the same?" Weilong walked towards the bathroom and said, Okay, you don't need to say it. Just now Zhou Jiji has already done 1, 5, 10. I have reported his bad deeds once, and you must have heard clearly outside the door." With that said, he was about to close the bathroom door. Kur came in with his heels crossed and said, "Girl, you don't know. It doesn't matter if he is misbehaving outside, but the worst thing is, his father doesn't like him. His mother fell out of favor not long after she got married, so she doesn't have much money at hand. He didn't save any money. He himself refused to learn well, and Sir Kiao Cheng never liked to interfere with his affairs. Now that I am still alive, he is already very poor and always fights famine. In the future, when I die, I will leave behind 20. The concubine here has more than a dozen sons, and even the celebrity in front of me can't get much of the property, so who else will get his turn? He has no skills except playing, and he will have to suffer a lot in the future." Weilong silently, Xiangkur stared at her for a long time, and then said with a smile, "Don't worry, even though I'm stupid, I'm not that stupid." Since she said this, she will pay attention every step of the way. Kiao did not break into Liang's house again, but whenever she went out to socialize, no matter what the gathering was, he was always there. Weilong was much colder towards him than when they first met. She has always been very busy socializing outside. Mrs. Liang was willing to let her out because she thought she was an eyesore at home. Mrs. Liang was having a heated fight with Lu Jialan. She knew that Weilong and Lu Jialan had some special feelings. She guessed that Weilong had some grudges in her heart, so she hoped that she would leave her eyes temporarily so as not to distract Lu Jialan. Unexpectedly, all good things come to pass. Mrs. Liang's old love, Sichuzi, suddenly returns to Hong Kong. Although Sichuzi was not young, his temperament was even more irritable than that of a young man, and he was also carefree. Mrs. Liang did not want to offend her longtime friend just for the sake of temporary pleasure, so she pushed Lu Jialan aside and concentrated on dealing with Sichuzi. In the other corner of the building, Weilong was lying sideways on the bed. It was dark and there was no light on. She slept there, motionless, but her body seemed to be sitting on a high-speed car, with the summer wind blowing on her cheeks. But that wasn't the wind, that was Kiao's kiss. Weilong didn't know how long he had been lying like this before he suddenly sat up, put on his slippers and dressing gown, and walked out to the small balcony. Although the moon has set, her person has been soaked in the moonlight, and her whole body is covered with light. She leaned quietly against the shutter door. If the balcony were a small black saucer, she would be the mother-of-pearl flower inlaid on the saucer. She was surprised that her mind was so clear. She had never been so clear-headed before. She is now trying to analyze her own psychology. She knows why she loves Kiao Ji so stubbornly and loves him with such low self-esteem. Initially, Of course, it was because of his attraction, but later, it was entirely because he didn't love her. Perhaps based on past experience, Qiaoqi has already discovered this secret that can conquer the unreasonable woman's heart. He said many tender words to her, but he never said a word that he loved her. Now she understood that Qiaoqi loved her. Of course, his love and her love had different forms. Of course, he loved her only for a moment, but she was so humble that she was easily satisfied. Georgie loved her tonight. This little happy memory was hers, and no one could take it away from her. Mrs. Liang, Sichu Si, and a group of other people who are eyeing her, let them do as they like. She has a new kind of security, new strength, and new freedom. She was very lucky that Qiaoqi did not marry her. She had heard that a man came back from a visit to Mount Lu and brought 7 or 8 jars filled with the famous white clouds from Mount Lu, ready to put some out to decorate his garden at any time. People who marry for love are just as stupid as those who put clouds in jars. Georgie is right. Georgie is always right. She leaned on the railing, imitating Qiaoqi, and put her head in the crook of her arms. The feeling came again, countless small cold joys, shaking their heads in every part of her body like golden bells. She hugged her arms tightly. She wanted to hug something else, so she whistled softly, and a white poodle ran out of the room, wagging its tail. Weilong hugged it and murmured to it. It was already about 4 o'clock in the morning, and there were still many stars in the sky, but the sky was gradually fading, like a piece of cyan gold paper. On the opposite mountain, the insects stopped chirping and became increasingly silent. Suddenly, there was a sound of footsteps into the balcony, and a person came. Weilong thought, this gardener is so diligent. He gets up before dawn. She was in a light mood at the time and was completely naughty like a child. She stretched out a hand to point at the person, put her mouth close to the dog's ear and whispered with a smile, "Who do you think that is? Who do you think that is?" The dog barked. Weilong took a closer look at the man, and was so frightened that his heart pounded. How could the gardener be so bloated? The sky in the tropics always gets brighter. As soon as it gets daylight, the vague shadow of the fat man downstairs becomes clear. It turns out that they are 2 people walking closely together. At first glance, they look like one person. The 2 people heard the dog barking upstairs and looked up to see Weilong. Before they could avoid it, she recognized the faces of Qiaoqi and Kur. One of Weilong's hands was originally supporting the puppy's chin. He suddenly exerted force with his fingers, and the dog's throat became choked with air. He struggled desperately to break free from Weilong's arms and jumped to the ground, sharp all the way. He yelled and ran into the house. Weilong stumbled and ran in after it. After entering the room, he stood there with his arms hanging stiffly on both sides. He stood for a while, then threw himself forward and fell on the bed, his hands still upright. It stuck to my body, and I fell on the bed with my face. It hit me hard, but I didn't feel any pain. She lay face down like this all night, never changing her position. The sheets under his face gradually became wet, and the cold water penetrated to the bottom of his shoulders. When she got up the next day, her whole body ached from the cold and her forehead was swollen. The clock in the house has stopped, the sun is shining yellow outside, and I don't know whether it is morning or afternoon. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while, then stood up and went to look for Gur. Sur was washing things in the bathroom downstairs. Small handkerchiefs were plastered all over the wall. They were apple green, amber, smoky blue, peach red, bamboo green, square by square, some neat and some crooked, which is quite picturesque. Nair saw Weilong in the mirror. His face was stunned, and he was about to burst into laughter. Weilong took out a big wet towel from the basin, hit it face to face, and made a swipe sound. My son's face got wet early and water splashed all over him. Nair let out a cry, turned his head, raised his hand to block it, and was hit again. The thick towel absorbed a lot of water, became extremely heavy, and made his arms tingle. Weilong squeezed the towel tightly with both hands and just beat him up and down, while Tuer just dodged and didn't fight back, defend or apologize. But there was inevitably some noise in the bathroom. The little girls came over and saw it, and they were stunned and confused. 2 of them became dissatisfied and whispered to each other, "Sir, please don't treat us like this. What kind of young lady is this? She has such a big temper, Sister Geyer. You are usually someone who refuses to let others go. What's wrong with you today?" Kur sighed and said, "Let her go. She's quite pitiful." These words pierced Weilong's heart. She glared hard again, threw away the towel, went limp, and slumped to the edge of the tub, holding her face in her hands, and started to cry. This commotion had already alarmed Mrs. Liang. When Mrs. Liang arrived, Tuer was squatting on the ground, cleaning up the puddles of water on the tiles. As she wiped the floor, water dripped from her clothes. Mrs. Liang shouted, "What's going on?" Kur didn't answer. Ask Weilong again. Where can he find a sentence? The little girls next to her also replied that they didn't know why the girl was angry. Mrs. Liang stopped asking further questions at that time and just asked someone to help Weilong upstairs to rest. Then she called Nair into the secret room and questioned her carefully. Tuer couldn't hide it, so he had to talk hesitantly about how the girl had made an appointment with Kiao Qi and how he had become suspicious. He heard the voices in the girl's room, but he didn't dare to say anything for fear of causing trouble, so he had to guard in the garden and think. While the man was leaving, I wanted to see what was going on. Unexpectedly, the girl found out and blamed me for supervising her actions, so she lost her temper with me today. After hearing this, Mrs. Liang nodded and said nothing. She had already figured out the truth to 80% or 90%. Immediately, he drank away the drink and sat by himself. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became, and his face turned purple with anger. She was picking her teeth, but when she gritted her teeth, the toothpick broke. She spat out the tip of the toothpick with a sneer, thinking to herself, "This Kiao Kiao is really the devil star in her life palace, who has made fun of her several times." She used her sight to lure him into taking the bait. Even after he swallowed the bait, he was still swimming freely and uninhibited. Finally, she made up her mind to accept her loss and ignore him. Because of his trouble, she couldn't stay and watch. With Sweetie gone, she felt like she had lost her left and right hands. On the one hand, she started anew and tried her best to train Weilong. After a lot of effort, she made Weilong somewhat qualified. In the limelight, when her worth was 10 times higher, Kiao Qizhou came back to enjoy the results. Not willing to accept this, at the same time, he took advantage of the situation and hooked up Geyer. Mrs. Liang lost his wife and lost his troops, and all the outstanding people around him were captured by him. How could he not be angry? But after all, Mrs. Liang was a person who understood the general situation. After pondering for a long time, she finally got angry and walked to Weilong's room. Weilong fell asleep with his face facing the wall, so Mrs. Liang sat down on the edge of the bed, was silent for a while, and then said in a trembling voice, "Weilong, how can you be worthy of me?" Then she took out her handkerchief and rubbed her eyes. Weilong was speechless. Mrs. Liang said again, "How do you want me to explain it to your father? According to the law, you live here with me, and I have to be responsible for your actions. It's just because I trust you too much. If I neglect a little, it will be wrong." What a mess. Ahem, you've tricked me. Weilong knew that she had caught him, so naturally she was able to speak confidently and plausibly. "I couldn't regret so many things that I should regret, so I calmed down and said bluntly, I did something wrong, and I can't bring it down. I will go back to Shanghai right away. If there is any gossip in the future, in front of my parents, I will bear the heinous crime myself, so that no misunderstanding will occur and my aunt will not be implicated." Mrs. Liang touched her chin and said, "You plan to go back, but you are not going back at this time. I'm not stopping you from going home. According to my wishes, I wish I could hand you back to your father with both hands, so that I can relieve myself of my responsibility and worry less. But you know how bad the mouths are in the world. Maybe you can still before you got home." The words and whispers in the wind had already reached your father's ears. "You are aware of his bad temper. Your return this time has confirmed the rumors outside. You have always been in poor health. Great. How can you not tolerate your father's infuriating you every day?" Weilong remained silent, and Mrs. Liang sighed. "It's all strange things. And it's all because you lost your temper in front of the girls today and didn't leave any room for yourself. Even for such a grown-up person, you still have the temper of a child. Regardless of face, how will I behave in the future? Weilong blushed and smiled sourly. Auntie, please forgive me. I am young and can't get rid of my irritable temper. When I reach Auntie's age, maybe I will be gentle and polite. Falling in love is also unknown, Mrs. Liang sneered. When you reach my age, it would be weird for you to have the opportunity to fall in love. Look at ordinary women from below-average families. Once they are 30 or 40 years old, she has become an old lady. If I had not been in a good environment and taken good care of myself, I would have been old a long time ago. You don't cherish your reputation so much, you have ruined your future. And not only will you not be able to marry a high-class person in the future, people of this class simply don't know what kind of land they are going to get. These words were shocking, and Weilong couldn't help but put his hands on his face, as if the pink, white and dark green appearance had been washed away by the passing years. Mrs. Liang leaned forward, put her arms on Weilong's pillow, and whispered, "For a woman, the most important thing is reputation. There is some difference between what I call reputation and what moralists call reputation. Nowadays, those who have new ideas people are not so particular about chastity. When the lady's family is socializing outside, someone will inevitably gossip. The more people talk about this type of gossip, the more lively it will be. Your reputation will only be higher, and it will have a negative impact on your future. There is no hindrance. There is only one thing that should be taboo. That is, you love someone but they don't love you. Or they love you and throw you away. How can a woman's frame withstand such a throwaway? Like what happened to you today. People who know the inside story say that you have a childish temper and do whatever you want. Speaking of it to the vicious people outside, they say that you are angry with the same subordinates because of Kiao Kikiao. This how unpleasant is that? Weilong sighed and said, then I can't control a lot of it. Anyway, I have to go back. I will never see Hong Kong again in this life. Mrs. Liang frowned and said, here we go again. You always talk about going back to Shanghai. As if going home will solve everything. The problem is not that simple. I'm up to you. You have your freedom. But I worry about you. Go home. Your father will not give you a good life. This is not a matter of anger. If you really want to earn this breath back, you have to conquer Kiao Kikiao. When he gives up, you can just throw him away. It's okay to leave him alone to relieve his boredom. That's his skill. If you run away like this now, it's too easy for him. Weilong smiled slightly and said, and Kiao Chi and I are done long ago. Mrs. Liang said, you think this matter is too hopeless. That's because your attitude towards him was wrong from the beginning. You are too straightforward. He is sure that you are the only one in your heart, so he dares to be so casual. Don't treat you as a problem. You should take some time to get close to others, so that they will always be confused and confused. He doesn't want you, but there are many people who do. Weilong saw her far away, turning round. It turned out that she was still working as a lobbyist for Sichu Zi. She couldn't help but almost laughed. She felt that there were more things she was confused about, but it seemed that she was not confused to this extent. She was fooled by Kiao Chi, and then by Sichu Zi. Will Kiao Chi think highly of her because of this? She sat up, put her bare feet on the floor, lowered her head, put her hands on her fluffy temples, slowly pushed her back, and said, thank you, and for planning so thoughtfully for me. But I still want to go back. Mrs. Liang sat up with her and asked, have you made up your mind? Weilong responded in a low voice. Mrs. Liang stood up, put her hands on her shoulders, looked directly into her eyes, and said, you were alone when you came. You are alone now. You have changed. Your home I have to change too. If I want to go back to the original environment, I'm afraid I can't go back. Weilong said, I know I have changed. I didn't like the me before. I don't like the me now even more. I like it. When I go back, I am willing to be a new person. After hearing this, Mrs. Liang was silent for a while, bent down, kissed Weilong solemnly on the forehead, and walked out. Her move, which was full of Catholic drama, did not seem to have any impact on Weilong. Weilong still put his hands in his hair, lost in thought, with a smile on his face, but his eyes were dead. As soon as Mrs. Liang went out, Ge called Qiaoqi and asked him to come to discuss the important matter. Qiaoqi knew that the scandal had happened, so she kept evading the situation and refused to come. Mrs. Liang frightened him and said, "Weilong is crying and going back to Shanghai. How can her parents give up? Naturally, Shanghai will find a lawyer to talk to you. This matter will become a big deal. When I get angry, I don't care if you can't eat and walk around. It's because Weilong met you here, and if you tell me, it doesn't even look good on me, so I'm busy looking for ways you can remedy it. Who knew you were so comfortable?" The emperor was not in a hurry. He killed the eunuch in a hurry. Although Qiaoqi came, she still smiled and said, "Although I am not an expert on China, I have done some research on the thinking and habits of the Chinese people. If Weilong's family, they are just talking to me to force me to marry her. They will never make it public." Mrs. Liang stared at him and said, "Marry her? Are you willing to marry her?" Qiaoqi said, "Don't say it. Wei Dragon has the advantage of Weilong." Mrs. Liang said, "Just answer honestly. You can't marry her." Qiaoqi smiled and said, "Aren't you asking knowingly? I have no autonomy in marriage. He has no money and is used to being blessed. He is a natural talent for recruiting consorts." Mrs. Liang poked him with her fingertips and cursed, "I knew you were a money worshipper." The two discussed how to make Weilong change his mind. Qiaoqi had already guessed that this incident would cause legal disputes, most likely because Mrs. Liang kept her words secret. If you want to get rid of the problem, you must first explain your actions to Mrs. Liang and express your feelings. The two talked all night, and Mrs. Liang finally got a satisfactory answer. The next day, Qiaoqi called Weilong one after another and sent flowers in a steady stream, with text messages hidden in the flowers. Weilong hurriedly went down the mountain to the city to inquire about the sailing schedule, and bought the ticket that day. Mrs. Liang expressed her non-interference attitude towards her stay, so she ignored everything. Weilong didn't take the family car, but walked down the mountain to catch a bus. When she came back, it suddenly started raining heavily in the middle of the mountain. On the steep coal road, the water rushed straight down. Weilong twisted her cheongsam as she walked, and it was like something fished out of the water. She had been cold and depressed for the past 2 days, and with this, as soon as she got cold, she fell ill when she got home, and her cold turned into pneumonia. She had a fever, and she wanted to go home urgently. When she was sick at home, her room was not filled with flowers from friends. However, in her memory, what was more beautiful than the flowers was a kind of glass ball that was used as a paperweight on her father's desk. The family gave it to her, holding it, Bing's hot hands. The flat glass ball is embedded with finely divided red, blue, and purple flowers, forming a tacky and neat pattern. The ball was heavy in my hand. Thinking of it reminded her of all the solid and reliable things in her life. The black iron bed she and her sister shared in her home. The mattress on the bed, the white floor and red wicker, the old boxwood dresser, the peach-shaped porcelain jar, which is lovely red in the sun, contains talcum powder. The beauty's calendar is nailed to the wall. On the beauty's arm, the mother used a pencil to thickly add Taylor, recommendation line, tofu paste, and third aunt's phone number. She grabbed the sheets with her hands and just wanted to go back, go back, go back. The more urgent it is, the slower the illness will be. By the time the disease got better, the rainy summer in Hong Kong had long ended, and it was the cool autumn. Weilong suddenly became suspicious. Maybe she got this disease voluntarily, maybe she subconsciously refused to go back and deliberately delayed it. It's easy to say, go back and be a new person, a new life. She is not as simple-minded as before. After studying and working in the society, it may not be an appropriate way out for a girl like her who is beautiful. It has no special skills. Of course, it would be better for her to get married. So, a new life is a new man, a new man. But she had completely lost her self-confidence because of Qiaoqi, and she couldn't deal with anyone. The day Qiaoqi didn't love her, the day she fell under his power, She clearly knew that Qiaoqi was just an ordinary prodigal, and there was nothing to be afraid of. What was terrible was the unreasonable and violent passion he aroused in her. She lay on the bed and looked at the sky outside the window. The sun at noon was shining brightly, but the sky was a cold metallic white, which hurt my eyes like a knife. Autumn is deep. A bird flew towards the top of the mountain. The blackbird flew high in the daytime, as if it was scratched on the edge of a knife, screamed, and went over the other side of the mountain. Weilong closed his eyes. Ah, Georgie. One day he will need her. At that time, she has lived in the small confines of another family for too long in order to adapt to the environment. Her new muscles are deeply embedded in the fence of life and cannot be pulled out. By that time, it was too late for him to ask her back. She suddenly decided not to leave, no matter what. From this moment on, she changed her mind in 5 minutes. Go. Don't go. Walk. Don't go. Between these two extremes, she rolled around on the bed, feeling like her heart was fried, because she wanted to end this pain as soon as possible, and when she could go out, she was busy booking a boat ticket. After I booked my boat ticket and came back, it was getting late, and the wind was blowing the short bamboo trees, making it quite chilly. The sea outside the bamboos and the sky outside the sea are already gray and yellow, except for the tall ivory mangroves, which in the dusk have red flowers as big as the mouth of a bull blooming all the way up and down. As Weilong was walking, a car drove up behind her and stopped in front of her. Weilong recognized Qiaoqi's car and stepped forward without even looking at him. Qiaoqi followed slowly in the car for a long time. Weilong had just recovered from his illness, but was still a little weak. He was sweating from exhaustion, so he had to stop and rest for a while. And the car also stopped. Weilong guessed that Qiaoqi must have taken this opportunity to express her feelings. Unexpectedly, he didn't say a word and she couldn't help but glance at him. He put one arm across the wheel, and he lay motionless on the wheel. When Weilong saw him, his heart ached with pain, and tears streamed down his face. He hurriedly walked forward, and Qiaoqi stopped following him this time. Weilong walked to the corner and looked back. His car was still there. The sky is completely dark, and the whole world is like a gray Christmas card. Everything is shadowy, and the only ones that really exist are very large ivory red flowers. Simple, original, with the mouth of a bull as big as the mouth of a bucket. Weilong returned to Liang's house and found out that Mrs. Liang was in the small study, so she went to the study. In the study room, only a small aqua desk lamp was lit next to Mrs. Liang. Weilong sat far away from her on a gold-lacquered chair. The two of them remained silent for a long time. The room was filled with the strong scent of cinnamon, which was similar to almond milk. Mrs. Liang was finishing applying the cinnamon, with her hands pointedly raised, waiting for it to dry. The two snow-white hands looked as if they had just been put on a stick. The fingertips were pinched and dripping with blood. Weilong turned his face away from Mrs. Liang and said slowly, "And is it mostly because of financial issues that Qiaoqi doesn't get married?" Mrs. Liang replied, "It's not that he doesn't have money to get married. Although the Qiao family is poor, it's not like she can't support a wife. Even if Qiaoqi has this arrogant problem, she always wants the couple to live more comfortably outside. And there is another layer. The Qiao family's family organization is too complicated. How can his wife is it easy to do? If the bride has some money, she can be less angry and see less weird faces." Weilong said, "Then he plans to marry a young lady with a rich dowry." Mrs. Liang remained silent. Weilong lowered his head and whispered, "I have no money, but I can make money." Mrs. Liang glanced at her, bit her lip, and smiled. Weilong blushed at her and argued, "How come I can't make money? I didn't ask Sichuzi what he wanted, and he just gave me that bracelet." Mrs. Liang giggled and smiled, while pointing a bloody index finger at Weilong. He was speechless for a moment. After a while, he said, "Look at you, kid. I just remembered that Sichuzi was here. At that time, people were full of good intentions, but you were so he was pushing and shoving randomly, as if a diamond was about to bite his hand. If I hadn't done something bad, I would have offended someone. Now try asking him for something. He might not know how to give you candy. Roses are better. I'm afraid the lady thinks the gift is too heavy and dare not accept it. Weilong lowered his head and sat in the dark, but said nothing. Mrs. Liang added, don't think that if a person is pretty, can say a few words for the occasion, and can sing a few English songs, he will be willing to give you a lot of money. I agree with you. You are a member of my own family, and to be blunt, you have a tender face, a soft heart, a big temper, and no decision-making, and you are really emotional as soon as you come. You are not a first-rate talent at all. Wei Long took a slight breath and said, let me learn slowly. Mrs. Liang smiled and said, you have a lot to learn. You might as well give it a try. Weilong really started practicing seriously, because he devoted himself to learning. And had Mrs. Liang always there to give guidance and help, he achieved outstanding results. Round Christmas, news of Qiao Qiqiao and Weilong's official engagement was published in the South China Daily. On the day of the engagement, Sichuzi sent a grand congratulatory gift. Qiao Qiqiao's father, Sir Qiao Cheng, also gave Weilong a platinum and diamond watch. Weilong came to thank her, and the old man was so happy that he bought her a black fox cloak. I was afraid that Mrs. Liang would be overly concerned, so I bought a white fox one as a gift to Mrs. Liang. Qiao Qi was still a little hesitant about this marriage, so Mrs. Liang advised him, I think you can just make do with it. You want to marry a wealthy lady, and your vision is high, but you don't like people from inferior families' eyes. A girl from a family with tens of millions of dollars in wealth, who is used to being arrogant. How can she be as easy to talk to as Weilong? You are bound to be restrained everywhere. The purpose of you asking for money is to play, and you are not having fun. What do you need money for? Of course, after 7 or 8 years, Weilong's income must have been greatly reduced. When she can no longer earn money to support the family, you can divorce. In British law, divorce is quite difficult, and the only way the legal reason is committing adultery. If you want to catch the other party's evidence of committing adultery, isn't it easy? Qiao Qi was convinced by what she said. They announced their marriage very quickly and entertained guests at a Hong Kong hotel, which was a lot of fun. There are very few apartments in Hong Kong. Renting an apartment for 2 people is too expensive, and sharing a house with others is too confusing. Mrs. Liang was reluctant to let go of Weilong, so she brought Qiao Qi in and allocated 3 rooms downstairs for them to live in. It was almost the same as a single-family apartment. From then on, Weilong was sold to Mrs. Liang and Qiao Qiqiao. He was busy all day long, either getting money from Mrs. Liang or getting people from Mrs. Liang. But she also had happy moments. For example, on the 30th night of the lunar calendar, she and Qiao Qi went to Wanchai alone to watch the excitement. Wanchai is not the central area of Hong Kong. It is remote and full of low-class entertainment venues. However, the annual New Year market, similar to the temple fair in the north, is held there. It is crowded with people and many fashionable people. I am also willing to squeeze in and buy some odd things. Weilong took a fancy to a vase of jade and plum blossoms at an antique stall, and Qiao Qi rushed forward to bargain with the clerk. The man was squatting on the top floor of the displays. He was wearing a tight-fitting wicker cotton-padded jacket, trousers of the same color, and a fedora hat pushed behind his head. The strong blue light of the gasoline lamp hanging in the middle of the street was shining on him. The hard-lined face of Cantonese style looks more and more hilly and deep. He put his hand on his knee, made gestures with the other hand, and counteroffered for a while, just shaking his head. Weilong pulled Qiao Qi and said, "Let's go." She squeezed in the crowd, feeling a strange feeling. Those with purple heads are densely packed with people, densely lit with lamps, densely packed with dazzling goods, small blue porcelain amphora, rolls of green and gold velvet, cellophane bags containing Ba Island shrimp chips, ember tropical durian cake, Buddha beads with big red tassels, goose yellow sachets, small black silver crosses, the big hat on the top of the pagoda. However, beyond the lamps, people and goods, there is the desolate sky and sea, boundless desolation, boundless terror. The same goes for her future. She can't even think about it. It's only filled with boundless terror. She had no permanent plans. Only in the trivial things in front of her could her timid and restless heart rest temporarily. Although it was dirty here, it did have a bit of a carnival atmosphere. Fireworks and fireworks were flying all over the street. As they walked, she and Qiaoqi huddled to avoid the red and green broomsticks. Qiaoqi suddenly shouted with a smile, "Hey, you're on fire!" Weilong said, "He's lying again." As he said that, he turned around to check her back. Qiaoqi said, "When have I ever lied to you? Squat down quickly and let me crush it." Weilong actually squatted on the ground with his knees bent. Qiaoqi didn't care about the dust on the soles of her shoes and used 2 or 3 feet to lift the hem of her cheongsam. The fire was extinguished. A hole had been burned into the cotton robe made of royal blue glitter with small silver longevity characters. The two laughed for a while and continued walking forward. After a while, Qiaoqi suddenly said, "Really, Weilong, I am a person who loves to lie. But I have never told you a lie, and I feel strange about it." Weilong smiled. "Still, thinking about this?" Qiaoqi forced her to ask, "I have never lied to you, right?" Weilong sighed, "Never. Sometimes, you clearly know that a little like in how happy it makes me, but nah, you are too lazy to worry." Qiaoqi smiled and said, "You don't need me to make up lies for you. You can trick yourself. One day, you will have to admit what a despicable person I am. At that time, you will also regret that you did it for me. You have sacrificed so much. If you get angry, you might kill me." "I'm so scared." Weilong laughed and said, "I love you. What does it have to do with you? There are all kinds of weird things, but they can't be blamed on you." Qiaoqi said, "In any case, our current distribution of rights and obligations is too unfair." Weilong raised his eyebrows and smiled slightly. "Fairness? In the relationship between people, there is no such thing as talking about it." The word fair comes to mind. I have to ask, why did you suddenly have such a conscience today? Qiaoqi said with a smile, "Because I see you celebrating the New Year so happily. Just like a child." Weilong said with a smile, "When you see me happy, you have to say a few uncomfortable words to stop me from being happy." The two of them walked all the way and looked at the displays on the stalls. There was everything here, but the most important thing was what they sold. People. Under the tragic gasoline lamp, there were groups of girls standing. Because of the exaggerated light and shadow, each of them had light blue noses, green cheeks, and large patches of rouge on their cheeks, which turned purple. One of them was the youngest one, no more than 13 or 14 years old, with a slim figure, dressed in a suit, wearing a lilac-colored thin woolen short coat and a bright red pleated silk skirt, and he was shivering from the cold. Because of the tremors, her smile couldn't help waving, like a reflection in the water, and her teeth hit her lower lip, biting it. A drunken British sailor came up from behind and patted her on the shoulder. She turned her head and gave him a wink, but it was a pair of watery eyes, with the corners of her eyes piercing into her hair. And fortunately, her ears with bright red chilblains. She clasped her hands on the sailor's arms and leaned her head on him. They could not walk a few steps side by side, when another sailor came, both tall and big, holding her between them. Her head only reached the crook of their elbows. A large group of sailors came from behind. They were all drunk and throwing fireworks in all directions. They caught a glimpse of Weilong and unanimously made her their target. The fireworks flew over like meteors chasing the moon. Weilong was so frightened that she ran away. Qiaoqi spotted their car, pulled her to the front of the car, pushed her in, and the two drove away from Wanchai. Qiaoqi smiled and said, "Who do those drunk loaches think you are?" Weilong said, "Really? What's the difference between me and them?" Qiaoqi held the roulette wheel with one hand and covered her with the other. "You keep talking nonsense." Weilong smiled and apologized. Okay. I admit that I said something wrong. Why is there no difference?" They have no choice but to do it voluntarily. As the car passed Wanchai, the popping and popping noise of the fireworks gradually subsided, and the traffic lights on the street, one after another, disappeared in the glass in front of the car. The car drove into a dark street. Qiaoqi didn't look at her, couldn't even see her, but he knew she must be crying. He took out the cigarette holder and lighter with his free hand, held the cigarette in his mouth, and lit it. As soon as the fire lit up, in that biting cold night, an orange-red flower seemed to bloom on his mouth. The flower withered immediately, and it was cold and dark again.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.